1, 2, 3. Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream. Oh, life could be a dream. If I could take you off the paradise above. Please tell me, darling, I'm the only one you love, and life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello again.
Well, it happened on the streets of New York. It happened on the streets of other cities, too. Pittsburgh, I know, out coast. And I think it happened at a time when it could only happen. It's almost like a disease. Once you get it, you can't get rid of it. But it's a great disease to have, I understand, from what these people tell me.
Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream. Yeah.
It's 4 or 5 people who are singing 4 or 5 different harmonic parts that put together make such a beautiful harmonic sound.
Boom, boom, bitty, bitty, boom, bop. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Dancing on a cloud.
Bitty, boom, bop. 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 Bitty, boom, bop.
It seems to me that the beauty is in the harmonics, is in the harmonizing itself. And as such, the lyrics got silly. I don't think it in any way detracts from the music if you're just listening for the beauty of the human voice in harmony.
Well, he's gonna buy me a wedding ring and I will hear all the angels sing and they will say, that is mine, all mine.
The vocal group party music is just that. It's a lead singer with usually 3 or 4 parts behind it. It's a group, vocal group, first tenor, second tenor, baritone, bass. And they all do a different note. They fill in like a note, and it makes harmony. It's a beautiful harmony. And then there's also a unison where they all sing the same note. You know? But that could also be considered as harmony, too.
And I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, I hope we meet again. Boom, boom, boom. Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream, sweetheart.
There was a time when they sang on the street corner, the subway stations, wherever they could find an echo. And only one station brings back that sound. CBS FM 101.1. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to open the doors to the Doo-Wop Shop with Don K. Reed.
And the doors are open. We're ready to roll this Sunday night here at CBS FM. Let's start with the Edsels. Rabble.
Blue moon, 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 blue moon. Dip, 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 moon, 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 blue moon. Dip, 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 moon, 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 blue moon. Dip, 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 bomb, 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 dang, 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 ding, and on, ding, blue moon.
That demonstrates a lot of what was going on back in the early days. Remember we used to talk about how
Maybe.
some of the early groups that didn't have the money to afford musicians when they went to record.
Right,
and
right.
A lot of early groups, recorded a cappella because they couldn't get the musicians in there. So
Low budgets.
the bass lead in that he comes in.
That was a staple back then.
Right. And the rhythmic riff that we're doing, like shoo-doop doop shoop shaboom, that's like takes the place of drums. Because we don't have no drums, we give our little, our vocals a rhythmic little thing. And a lot of
part
groups,
of the harmony adds to the lead in the rhythm.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that goes along with those little nonsense bass riffs.
Ooh.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Remember those?
Like
Yeah.
shoo-wop, doobie-doo.
No, that's it.
And doom bop doom, like those teenagers, all of that. Yeah. Or what about what was that? Get a Job.
Silhouettes.
Silhouettes.
We know that one. Let's try that.
Bass lead-ins.
Oh, yep, right there.
Vocal group harmony consists of the harmony itself among usually 4 or 5 singers. There's usually a lead singer, there's usually a bass singer, and then there's commonly a high tenor that floats over the lead, usually in falsetto, and then 2 others, a second tenor and a baritone that blend to give a background harmony.
Get a job. If there is any work for me, I said, I come back to the house, hand my woman's mouth, preaching and a crying, tell me out of line about a job.
It consists of usually nonsense syllables, tra-la-la, dip, 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 and then it's got simple music and lyrics, and very little instrumentation.
Whoa, whoa, dancing on a cloud. I know why, 'cause I am feeling so proud. Like to yell, yell, scream real loud. Because you're mine, all mine. Now when he takes me in his car, oh, how we take the curve. And when he takes me in his arms, and when we kiss, there goes my nerve. Well, he's gonna buy me a wedding ring, and I will hear all the angels singing. They will say that is mine, all mine.
And the bass singer in the background is using nonsense syllables, usually in a Blue Moon type of way, bon, ba, ba, bon, like Fred Johnson did quite well. And usually the music is very simple. The lyrics are simple, moon, June, spoon kind of lyrics, and very little instrumentation. The only time the instruments play any kind of a significant role is during the break of the song, the middle of the song, and usually that's a tenor sax that fills in that instrumental part.
The genesis of it goes back to slavery, when on the plantations in the cotton fields, the slaves sang to not only pass the time of day, but of course it was, as we have found out over the years, a means of communication.
I had a dream the other night, the funniest dream of all. I dreamed I saw a great big man behind the garden door. Little eyes, I love you, honey, little eyes, I love you, honey, I love you in the springtime and the fall. Honey, 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 little eyes, I love you, honey, little eyes, I love you, honey, I love you the best of all. Honey, 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 little eyes, I love you, honey, little eyes, I love you, honey, I love you in the springtime and the fall. Honey, 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 little eyes, I love you, honey, little eyes, I love you, honey, I love you the best of honey, 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 honey.
And the great songs that evolved from the plantations, from the cotton fields, and later on in the churches is the beginning of vocal group harmony, down through the Jubilee singing, and then into the 20th century, and for me, the greatest vocal group that ever lived, the Mills Brothers.
My darling, please wait for me till then. No matter when it will be, one day I know we'll be back again. Please wait till then. Our dreams
it's a fantastic thing, something that I truly believe you don't get over. When you hear great harmony, you hear 4 or 5 people, men or women, harmonizing together. And it's proven on the streets of New York when young people today, and I'm amazed that young people still do it, they stop and sing, and people just, they stop what they're doing, and they listen to it. And if it's really exceptional, what a joy.
Together, that's the only time we religion, brother, it's good enough for me, my Lord. That's the only time we religion, brother, that's the only time we religion. Together, that's the only time we religion, brother, it's good enough for me. Yes, just come on, brothers, if you want to hear a story about that preacher and the bear. Gather round, boys, I don't want you to miss none of this here story, cause it goes like this. A preacher, he went out to hunt. It was on one Sunday morning. Though he was one Christian young man, but he took his gun along. Well, the first thing he shot was a bunch of fine quails, and he shot him a nice fat hare. Then through the woods on his way back home, he met a great big grizzly bear. Then the Reverend fell down upon his knees. He sent up a great long prayer, whilst he cast one eye to the heaven on high, but kept the other eye on the bear. He said, the Lord delivered Daniel from the lion den, Jonah from the belly of the whale. The 3 Hebrew boys from the fiery furnace said, a good book do declare. Now look here, Lord, if you don't help me, don't you go to helping that bear. He needed that only.
It was from the church that a lot of people, most of whom were African American, and later for some reason Italian American, but the black experience and sound came from gospel music and from singing in church.
See, brother, the preacher made a touchdown.
Does she love me?
In 1948, when Sonny Till and the Orioles came on the scene out of Baltimore, they changed the face of rhythm and blues and vocal group harmony forever.
Is she fooling? Is it all a game? Am I
If anybody can be called the first rock and roll sex symbol, if you will, it was Sonny Till.
He was a matinee idol in the Chitlin circuit, as it was called, including the Apollo Theater and similar theaters in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. And he was he was idolized for his singing and I guess his good looks as well.
Sonny Till had a way he would lean to the side when he sang, and he would point to the heavens, and the women went nuts. The women began to squeal, throw various articles of clothing on the stage, and they developed a style that all the other groups began to emulate. One song comes to mind, and again, in my teachings, I always point to as the song that ushered in what we now call the doo-wop era, and it was by the Ravens. It was in 1950, called Count Every Star.
Count every star in the midnight sky. Count every rose, every...
There are elements in that song that lasted for another 20 years. It was the first song that had a pronounced bass line that later on all bass singers, did do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. It had never appeared before until Jimmy Riggs did that on the opening of Count Every Star. That was the beginning of it. That was, if you can point to one song and say, that is the first doo-wop vocal harmony song, it's Count Every Star, 1950 by the Ravens.
Count every wave on a stormy sea. Count every star.
But as we came into the mid-1950s, 1954, which is considered the watershed year, that's the year that G by the Crows and Shaboom by the Chords crossed over to the pop charts. And those were up-tempo songs. And into 1955, you had a mixture of up-tempo, we used to call them in those days jump tunes, and the ballads. By 1956, with Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, the Kitty Leads came about, and most of those songs were up-tempo. We wanted to dance.
Love that girl. Oh, 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 gee, my oh, gee. Well, oh, oh, gee. Oh, I love that girl. Love that girl. Oh, 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 please listen to me. Hey, 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 my plea. Oh, I love that girl. Love that girl.
And all my friends in junior high school and high school, that's all we wanted to do. We wanted to emulate the sounds we were hearing. And then in the neighborhood, we started to have stars. In my neighborhood, all of a sudden, I've got the Heart Tones.
I wanna Sunday kind of love.
So many people in the neighborhood. We had neighborhood stars. And with Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, release of Why the Fools Fall in Love in 1956, most of us then realized that maybe we could become superstars, that maybe we could become professionals.
Interestingly, the early part of doo-wop in the early 50s, the songs and the themes that were involved in those songs were really oriented towards an adult audience, the people who'd come from the wars or who had come into an adulthood just at the end of the wars. But then something very profound takes place. A young group called the Teenagers, focusing on their lead singer Frankie Lymon, break with an enormous hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, which is not oriented towards the adults. It's really oriented towards young teenagers. And from that period on, I believe that doo-wop really begins to change.
Now we come to a mood that is the product of our present generation. The bubbling enthusiasm of our teenagers was the inspiration for what is now the most popular style of music in the country, rock and roll. A few short weeks ago, 5 teenage boys went into a recording studio and they said they had a song they wanted to sing. Well, it took a little time, 3 weeks to be exact, but they were heard and their song was recorded. It is now the #1 record in America. And the song is, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And the boys appropriately enough call themselves the Teenagers. So here you are. So, you guys are the Teenagers.
That's right, Mr. Lane.
Come on, boys. Let's sing our song now.
That come out of you?
Yes, sir. Can we sing now?
What's your hurry?
I have to make my money before my voice changes.
Good news for you, Dad. It ain't gonna go much lower. You're in a barrel now. Frankie, you amaze me. Tell me something. You're only 13 years old, and yet you wrote this big hit. How did it ever happen?
Well, Mr. Lane, one day I was dressing, and inspiration came to me, so I wrote the song.
Oh, well, what was the inspiration?
I needed a new suit.
Well, that's a pretty good reason. But I can't understand how you could write Why Do Fools Fall in Love? What does a 13-year-old boy know about love?
Well, Mr. Lane, I've been falling in love since I was only 5.
5?
But I've been a fool about it since I was 11.
Well, don't complain, lad. You've only had 2 rough years. I go all the way back to Bridie Murphy. I think we've had enough of this little chit-chat. This is your first nationwide television appearance, isn't it?
That's right, sir.
And I know that everybody's waiting to hear you sing, so are you ready to rock and roll it?
That's right.
That means I ought to get lost, huh?
That's about it.
Why do fools fall in love? Why do fools fall in love? And love is the way to break the day.
for the summer, they would have summer events, and one of the events was they're having a talent show. And this young gentleman, Frankie Lymon, had a group called the Esquires, and it was him, his brother, and another gentleman, and Frankie played the bongos. One played the sticks, and his brother played the congo. And at the dress rehearsal, he just kind of hung around with us. And we did the show, and it seemed like after that rehearsal, that dress rehearsal, and we did that talent show, he was in the group.
Baby, baby.
We all grew up in New York City in the early 50s. We all hung out together. We went to school together, and we sang together. At that time, singing on the street corners was the thing to do. It was a way to get noticed. And one day we did.
So right now on WKMH, as we're bobbing with Robin, little Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, and our flyer for the day, why do fools fall in love?
We were all listening to the radio during the afternoon, and it was one station AM at the time because FM wasn't that popular or even really existed because mostly ham radios were just FM. And once we heard the song on, I think it was the William B. Williams show, we got excited. We were all jumping around. Says, damn, that's Frankie on the radio. That's Frankie, that's Frankie. And we waited till the song was over, and then the William B. Williams came on and said, yes, that's Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, an up-and-coming new hit called Why the Fools Fall in Love in the top 10. And it had only been out about less than 30 days, and the song just really just took off.
Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were the first superstar group out of New York City. Again, they changed the music.
Because they, with Frankie Lymon being so young and the other group members also being young, it kind of said that this is not just for adults, this is not just for older teens, this is for us, the kids. Louis Lymon followed in his brother's footsteps, and although Frankie was the king, Louis came pretty close. Their sound was almost identical to that of his brother's group, and he just had a wonderful feel for it. I guess they kept it in the family.
My life changed dramatically. It changed way before I even got into show business because Frankie's success changed everybody's lives. So it was like, you know, you walk down the street and there goes Frankie Lymon. Oh, no, that's not Frankie Lymon. That's his brother. You know, oh, no, that's Frankie Lymon. No, that's his brother. So our lives changed very dramatically, very, very dramatically. I mean, socially speaking, it was like a parade of girls every afternoon and evening, you know, just walking by the house. And where we lived was what they call a High Bridge Park. So all the girls would come up from Harlem and from the Bronx and just walk by the park, and it would be a parade of girls every day, just to think, with the chance of seeing Frankie Lymon or one of the Teenagers. So a lot of guys in the neighborhood benefited from that.
Juvenile delinquent.
really didn't have any say-so whatsoever. I mean, in those days, you were asked what to do, and you did it. And the manager literally just ran your life, really, you know. Sometimes you had exclusive managerial contracts where they could tell you what to wear, you know, what time to come in. So it was a lot of control over the artists in those days because it was a new business. It was a new industry blooming.
We had been recording all together all the time. And I got some mail from here, United States, that our latest release, which was Out in the Cold Again, was fine and good, you know, was doing well already. But the flip side on that was just Frankie singing by himself, a tune called A Miracle in the Rain. So we made a big fuss about that. But Frankie liked the idea, and when we got back to America, he said he was going to lead the group.
Frankie went on his own and began to do things for Roulette, like The Only Way to Love, good records that never happened. It just couldn't happen. I don't know why they couldn't get Frankie off the ground. But the group went on and got a new lead singer, Billy Lambro, I think his name was, and they recorded a record, Flip Flop, I'm quite sure they told you, and they appeared at the New York Paramount, and the record Flip Flop was appropriate because it really flopped. And the pictures were great and everything, and they looked great, but it just didn't happen. It didn't happen. It was killing them. It was 56 to 57, and that was it. It was over. It hurts, you know? It hurts an artist who's been popular to not have anything going, and you're still in that world, and you feel that you should still be there, and there's nothing to back it up, and it's horrible. And you begin to look for substitute strength.
Drugs was in the 50s everywhere, but everywhere. And it was potent then too, and cheap, all right? Drugs was backstage, you know. Drugs was off stage, on stage. It was just everywhere. And it took a lot of people away from their normal course of life. Frankie was one of them.
By the time he's 17, nobody wanted no part of him. He got blackballed from all the nightclubs, all the record companies, the booking agents. The man went broke completely. I picked him up on the streets of Broadway, and my challenge was to make the biggest comeback of his career.
Remember when he was about this tall, and now he's about this tall. When he was this tall, he had his first $1 million round time. Ooh, baba, ooh, baba, ooh, baba, ooh, baba, why do fools fall in love? Talking about the one, the only, the great Rockaway now, Frankie Lymon!
Hurt to see Frankie. He was at his lowest point. Frankie was no longer the Frankie Lymon I knew. He was always a brat and egotistical and everything, but he had the voice, and he could back it up. But then without the voice and he couldn't back it up, he was just another Joe.
His voice is changing. Nobody wanted to develop the change of the voice of the young kid to the young man to the grown man. Nobody wanted to go through that transition with him.
Teacher, educate me with a caress. Teach me nothing less than a lesson I'll never forget. Teacher,
I was with a friend of mine from the Navy, and one of the neighborhood kids said, "Hey, Lou, I heard that your brother died." So I laughed to my friend. I said, "Man, that's about the 4th time somebody told me that he had died." So since I was so close to my grandmother's, I said, well, let me go upstairs and say hello to my grandmother, and we'll have a joke about him dying again. And lo and behold, it was my father, the policeman, and the person from the corridor. It was no joke. I didn't laugh that day.
Doo-Wop music is definitely from a more innocent period. And I never use this term myself, but a lot of other authors have. It's called they refer to it as the romantic music of unrequited love.
Probably because it represents a time, I think, when America was innocent, if America was ever innocent. But certainly a time when the industry, the music industry as it appealed to pop and to kids was in its infancy. And as such, I think it reflected a more innocent age of youth. And for me, that always has an appeal.
Come go with me. Come into my
Doo-Wop, rock and roll 50 music was good American music. I mean, you couldn't find better music. It was fun music. I mean, we used to dance close together.
You're my love, you're my angel, you're the girl of my dream. I'd like to thank you for waiting patiently. Daddy's home, Daddy's home to stay. How I've waited for this moment to be by your side.
It was about love songs, and it was about young love, and it was the same kind of love that adults experienced.
Daddy's home to stay.
Was it a time of innocence and a romantic time of period? I would say definitely yes.
A Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday went by. It wasn't on a Tuesday afternoon.
We wrote these tunes for the young ladies, that were in our labs, and all the young girls did it for the young men. It's just like Good Night, Sweetheart.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go.
When I wrote Good Night, Sweetheart, I didn't write it to be a recording. I wrote it for a young lady named Bonnie Jean. And I used to go to her house and I'd stay all day. And I was so much in love with this young lady, and I'd stay all night. And it got to the point her mama got tired of it. And mama said, look here, Pookie, your mama might not care about you being out at 12 o'clock, but she didn't mean for you to be here at 12 o'clock. So when I'm going home, I put this song together called Good Night, Sweetheart. Took it to the group, and we put it together and sang. And basically, I think it was most of the groups that did was for the love that we had in our hearts.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go.
The youngsters would like to have the spotlight dances, the ladies' choice, where the ladies always chose the ballads. It was the time to get close, the time to hug, the time to think of Saturday night, to think of proms. And so that's why there was a lot of romance in the music. The lyrical content was very simple and very beautiful. It talked of our romance, which was always, it seemed to culminate in walking down the aisle.
I hate to leave you, I really must say, oh, good night, sweetheart, good night.
Get a job.
Sha-la-la-dum,
If I
when I read the paper, I read it through and through. And my girl has the nerve to say, if there is any work for me. I said, I come back to the house, have my woman's mouth, preaching and crying, tell me that I'm lying about a job.
You know I still can't find
Sha-la-dum, sha-la-la-dum, sha-la-dum, sha-la-la-dum, sha-la-dum, sha-la-la-dum, sha-la-dum, sha-la-la-dum,
get a job.
Sha-la-la-dum, sha-la-la-dum.
There is a romantic notion that a lot of these guys started on the street corner and were singing under street lamps, and a lot of that's true, especially in the urban areas where there wasn't a lot of indoors to sing in. It wasn't suburbia, it was small apartments in high-rise buildings, and there was plenty of room on the street. Almost every corner in Harlem had another group singing on it, and it kind of adds to the romance of the whole topic.
Doo-Wop is a unique urban music that starts in the United States, and its major cities are New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Los Angeles. Especially in the northeastern sections, what you saw happening there were a lot of kids, time on their hands, young teenagers, etc. They either couldn't afford instruments or they didn't really know how to play instruments. But what they did have is an opportunity to practice and to sing together. So they'd sing on street corners, they'd sing in their auditoriums at school, they'd sing in halls, they'd sing in the subways, and they got to be very, very good.
Practice in the subway, in lobbies, and in halls, even in the doorway, singing doo-wops to the wall. And if we went to a party and they wouldn't let us in.
Everybody tried. And hanging out on the street corner in the cities with all the people you had to interact with, I think that's why these groups were created, because you had a lot of people to bounce off. If Joe didn't work out, maybe Tommy would. And, you know, you had a lot of guys to pick from. I think it was just something that happened in the city because there was more people available to, in a way, try out for the group and get the sound you wanted.
The four of us, we occasioned in hallways a lot. It was echoes in the hallways. The sounds bounced off the hallway walls, and we loved that echo sound.
And everybody did it. If you go into any junior high or elementary school, you could find some, you know, a group trying to do a little singing or something. And some made it, and some fell by the wayside. But it was very popular in the 50s for a young man to try to sing a little bit.
Today we can stay in our homes and be entertained with everything. You got, you know, the VCR, you got the DVD, you got television, you got radio, you got air conditioning. Why leave? Years ago on a hot summer night, a lot of people didn't have television, didn't have air conditioning, so they went out. They sat on the porch. Guys used to hang out on the corner because it was cooler. And just, you know, the camaraderie between guys. Can you sing? I sing. You hear that song? And they'd start just harmonizing on the street corner. And all of a sudden they realized they could sing. And maybe we can do it. Maybe we can have a record.
And today when I play my old 45s, I remember when I used to sing with my friend. We were looking for an echo, an answer to our sound, a place to be in harmony, a place we almost looking for an echo, an answer to our sound.
Frankie Lymon had a tremendous, profound effect on the music, as great, if not greater, than Michael Jackson had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers' songs had a profound effect on many, many other groups. Arlene Smith talks about that her group, when she was developing, they didn't really think that they were going to be able to ever get a hit record until one day she heard on the radio this tremendous song, And the announcer, or the disc jockey, said that this song, you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? They played the song, and then the disc jockey announced that Frankie Lymon was only 13 years old.
When I heard that, I said, well, he's not much older than I am. You know, we're in the same age group. Let me try and do this a little bit more seriously.
And the result of that was their big hit, Maybe.
Well, I was 11 years old when it started. Okay.
And I believe I was 16.
And I was probably about 13 years old.
I was about 12, you know. No, I was, yeah, between 12 and 13. When the records were recorded. Now, you know, when I think about it, it was probably 11 when the group started to formalize, 11, 12.
They would sing, I think they were on the basketball team, and they would sing in the locker room. They would sing at confraternities. They would sing at churches or community centers. Not on the street corner like the guys would do, because if you were a nice girl in the 50s, you didn't do that. You didn't hang out on a corner. So I think that had a lot to do with it, too. But once it started rolling, the ladies made a big mark in this music. They really did.
He's gone.
I wrote He's Gone because I didn't get out much. And there were a lot of parties, you know, and there was this guy that I liked. And he had the prettiest eyes, and I just thought he was fabulous, and couldn't go to the parties. And I lived in a tenement on 163rd between Union and Prospect. And my living room windows faced into a court. So it would drive me crazy. You could hear the music, you could hear the voices. I knew he was there. And I couldn't go. So I just entertained myself with the piano.
I'm sorry you're gone.
I was isolated because I went to a parochial school. I was isolated because I was the lead singer. I was isolated because that was my personality. I was always looking up in the clouds, dreaming about something, which is a singular pursuit. I like to paint and write poetry and all that stuff that doesn't require a whole lot of people being around you. So I found myself isolated, and the only time I really felt cool was when I was bathed in that spotlight. I felt comfortable and I felt really loved.
They would hit the stage with their beautiful dresses, with the crinoline slips and their white gloves, and they had voices and still have voices that border on the angelic. When you listen to them, you hear angels sing. And with Arlene Smith's fantastic lead, it was a combination that was unbeatable. Every other female group that followed owes it to the Chantels.
I mean, they weren't just 5 people living in the same neighborhood, so they got together to sing, even though some of them couldn't sing. They were 5 great voices that went to school and came out of a choir. Arlene Smith was fantastic. Of course, today Arlene got older and the group broke away, and now they have Amy Ortiz. But Amy Ortiz is what Arlene Smith used to be. Great.
One, two, three, hey! Look at me.
started in the Washington Projects. The Washington Projects was just being built in 1956.
Right.
And we all moved from different neighborhoods and different boroughs into the Washington Projects. One of the girls moved on the 14th floor. And then her sister, who was also in the group, they moved to the 8th floor.
Yeah.
And I lived on the third floor. So when it came time for rehearsal and stuff, all we had to do was run from floor to floor.
Don't forget the other thing we used to do. We used to, being that we all lived in the same building, our mothers didn't allow us to stay on the phone a lot. So we used to like hit the pipe, you know, like that pipe is over there. And one would look out the window, the ones that lived on the top would look down, and the ones that lived down below would look up. And we'd say, hey, 10 minutes in front of the building, you know?
And it took us a long time to get out of the neighborhood because right across the street was our elementary school and 2 blocks up was our junior high school.
Right.
So we really never got to take a bus until after we became a group. The 3 older ones was in the junior high school, and Jane and I was in the elementary school where Mr. Lee worked.
Yeah.
And Jane and I didn't kind of like him so good, so we started writing these little derogatory things about him. And when we all got to the next level and went to the other school, we said, this is a good song, let's really make it a song. So we started singing and get the harmony right and everything. Jerry Wexler and Armin Erdogan. They both decided they liked that song that we sang. We sang Mr. Lee and Look at the Stars. And they loved the songs, but Armin Erdogan said, well, I think we should change the words a little bit. Can't you girls write some different words? Because make it like you love the guy instead of like you don't like the guy, you know? Because he asked us where did the song come from, and we told him all about Mr. Lee. He said, well, let's see if y'all can go into the place there and write a song, the same song, but with different words saying that you love the guy, and which is what we did.
I met my sweetie.
Bobettes were another neighborhood group of 5 young girls who had a certain vitality. Maybe because they were younger. They just had a bounce and a verve. Their style, their sound was infectious. Retha, the lead singer, she was so full of vim and vigor.
After Mr. Lee came out, every time we looked around, there was a song out of it about Mr. Lee. They had a song called Walking with Mr. Lee, a song called Talking with Mr. Lee, a song called Dancing with Mr. Lee. Then they had a musical that was called something about Mr. Lee.
Right.
So we said, why is everybody making songs about our song? Let's make our own answer to our song. And we decided, let's kill him.
And that way we get rid of him.
Nobody else could make a song about Mr. Lee unless they say Mr. Lee's ghost came back or something like that. So that was
Return.
Right. That's why we set out and we just all got together and wrote I Shot Mr. Lee.
1, 2, 3. I shot Mr. Lee. 3, 4, 5. I got tired of his job.
I taught junior high school for over 30 years. And one time, it's so long ago, I believe in the early 1990s, I had a student in school named Jonathan Lee. And I said to him, by any chance, you're not related to 1, 2, 3, here comes Mr. Lee by any chance, are you? And he said to me, he was my great-grandfather.
Well, by the end of 1957, the Diamonds had 8 hits deep. We were actually still 4 blue-eyed, semi-virgin white guys from Toronto in brown 3-button suits, and we were about to get a terrific education. We were invited to join rock and roll's first major touring show, and for 60 days of one-nighters, we barnstormed North America with a dozen Pioneer Jukebox giants. We traveled in a Greyhound with Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, the Drifters,
Clyde McFadden, Fats Domino,
Laverne Baker,
Dion and the Belmonts.
Yeah.
So
it was
about
the
13 or
Spaniels.
14 acts on the show.
I think we did 60 shows in 60 days, and it was exhausting.
We were on the road with a lot of different groups, Screamin' Jay Hawkins and I think the Crests and Laverne Baker and God knows how many other people were on the show.
We weren't educated in the way that Americans are about what the history of the country was and what discrimination was all about. There were no black people in Canada at that time that I didn't meet a black person until I was in my late teens. And so it was interesting to be on the bus with black folk and see how they were treated. We were just observers. All the black people sat at the front of the bus, by the way. We of Caucasian persuasion took up the back half. The reason was explained to me by Phil Everly. He said, when we get into the South, we're going to have to stay at separate hotels.
The bus would park in front of the Sheraton Hotel, and we were all ready to jump up and go into the Sheraton Hotel together. We had no idea that, the white and black situation during those times. But we noticed that some of the white artists, they got off the bus and they went into the Sheraton. So we're saying to our manager, 12, 13, and what were we, 14 and 16? Well, why aren't we going in?
We learned all about the Deep South and the stuff that was going on down there because we were born in Harlem, Brooklyn,
No, what it is, we were born in the South, but we were raised in the city.
Now, Chantels are from the North, and we had no idea what we were going to run into during that time. I mean, the situation, we had never seen a sign that said colored on one side and white on one side. So we didn't know. We had no idea.
Like the white audience had to be on one side of the room, the black on the other side, or the black was in the balcony, the white was downstairs. And we had big crowds, but it was always divided.
And I don't know if you know this about rock and roll, but from a musical technical standpoint, the accent is on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's puts the rock in the roll. But with the audience sitting on two sides and with that train headlight coming at you, sometimes you couldn't see. But I always knew where the white kids were sitting because they were the ones clapping on 1 and 3.
Only you can make this world seem right. Only you can make the darkness bright. Only you and you alone can thrill me like you do.
The success was so quick that a lot of managers and record companies were really astounded by the success that the record industry was having at that particular time. They didn't realize what, the gold mine that they had at the time. And I would safely say 99% of the artists were totally ignorant of the business itself.
The music business in the era that I came along in the 1950s was populated by children. It was populated by children and controlled by men who we thought were old men at the time, but as I look back in retrospect, they were in their late 20s, early to mid 30s.
You're not talking about the major record companies. In those days, they were referred to as independents, and in many ways operated out of storefronts in ghetto neighborhoods. And consequently, there was this huge pool of talent who were basically high school singers and street singers. A lot of people thought, a lot of those groups, the Cadillacs, the Valentines, the Harptones, were grown men, but in essence, they were really 17, 18, and 19-year-olds.
The people who ran record companies in those days, they may not have been musicians, but they had an innate quality of finding talent and in their own way, with their limited musical ability, nurturing that talent. And they exploited us. We had no business acumen. Our parents had no business acumen. The term entertainment lawyer did not exist. There were no entertainment lawyers then. If the family had a lawyer, it was their real estate lawyer, or it was their probate lawyer. And if they looked at contracts, they truly didn't know what they were looking at either. It was truly a new time, a new era. And the only people that had any understanding and wherewithal at all were the people who were sitting on the other side of the glass. And yes, they exploited all of us.
Really never thought of it as a business. You know, it was chasing the girls and drinking the whiskey, and we wasn't making no hell of a lot of money. We was just enjoying. So we didn't know that much money was involved in doing this.
We didn't know the business about publishing or copywriting our tunes. That was another thing altogether. So we were just happy to be able to get on stage and do our things under the lights and hear the girls screaming and get a few dollars. That was good enough for us. You know, that was heaven just about.
Most of the fellas were not getting paid. You know, they were having the hits, but the money wasn't forthcoming. The record company was keeping the money. Plus, every time you approached them, they would tell you, you owed them money for the session. You owed them money because they bought you a car. You owed them money because so. So consequently, we never got any money from the companies.
And they never realized that 20 years later, the singers never did, that those records would appreciate in value, and they had no recourse.
We lost a lot of money, but hey, that's basically our mistake, because we can blame it on somebody else because they didn't school us, but we didn't do it ourselves either. So, you know, you don't handle your own thing, it can be disastrous, which it was for us, financially wise.
But it was an experience for me. It was like going to school. I'm not bitter with anybody. And it was the day of the riff-off. I mean, every act in the business, I imagine, that didn't really know his art was getting ripped off.
When you come up from a dance and in the hall to make a romance, when you do the things you shouldn't do, peekaboo, I'm watching you. When you ought to be in school, learning about the golden rule, when you dance with somebody on the shoe, peekaboo, I'm watching you. Look in the dark, you see my face. Don't try to hide, I'm every place. Play cool, kinda sweet. I'm gonna give you what? Hope you heard the thing I said. Let it sink in.
Earl Speedo Carroll and the Cadillacs, they were choreographed by a man named Charlie Atkins, who was part of the dance team of Coles and Atkins. Charlie Atkins and Charles Honey Coles. Their choreography was so precise. There was so much precision there. Every song had a different set of steps. And Charlie Atkins' philosophy was, whenever the group isn't singing, they're dancing, they're moving. And the magic was that when it came time for the group to sing again, they would somehow be right back at the microphone and they would begin to sing. And then when they'd finish singing, they'd be moving again. They'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps away from the microphone. It was so beautiful, and they dressed sharply.
No more. I'm from New York, born and raised in Harlem, and most of the guys in the group is from Manhattan. We all went to school together, and very young, in the early 50s, it was a thing to be a part of a singing group, rhythm and blues they was calling it at that time. And then they went to rock and roll, to street corner music, Doo-Wop. It had several names, but every kid in New York, really, that was their thing.
No more.
I know on 142nd Street, you had a group like the Solitaires,
and the Crows, the guys that made G. Then if you went downtown to 118th Street, you would have the Five Crowns, Charlie Boy, which turned over to be the Drifters with Benny King and those guys. And we used to try to get on the amateur show at the Apollo Theater. The Apollo crowd would let you know whether you had something or you didn't. You know, if they didn't like you, they'd boo you right off that stage. And if they did like you, they would let you know that you had something going. We were playing an armory up in some part of Massachusetts, I remember. It was a sellout show. And after the show was over, we were on our way out, and Bobby Phillips, the bass singer, the ham of the group, my right-hand man, he seen a big torpedo sitting outside of the armory. And my head has always been a little tall, and they used to tease me about it, and they still do. And he looked at the torpedo and say, "Hey, Speedo, there's your torpedo." And I was very upset about it. I said, "Listen, man, number one, my name is Earl to you, sucker, not no Speedo." And they fell out. All the guys just waddled on the ground. They laughed at this Speedo, there's your torpedo. And we got in the car, and it was a big number that year by a group called Waterboiling Baby. And we took their Womp Wah Shooby-Doo. That's where we first got Womp Wah Shooby-Doo. And we put that and wrote lyrics to Speedo. And by the time we got to New York City from Massachusetts, we had written the song, Speedo. Well, now they often call me Speedo, but my real name is Mr. Earl.
Now they gonna call Speedo till they call up and get you big league girl. Yeah, yeah. But now they all call Speed, cause I don't go on wasting time. No, my name is Speedo. I don't waste no time. No. And if I need a real fine box, sure gonna make her mine. Yeah. But now some call me Mo, some call me Joe. Just remember Speedo, he don't ever take it slow. Speedo, real name is Mr. Earl. Yeah.
We were looking for an echo, an answer to our sound, a place to sing in harmony, a place we almost found.
The vocal harmony era began to change when all music began to change, and that was with the British invasion. It began to be watered down with the so-called teen idols, and that was all political. You know, they wanted to, you had too many black groups, and we wanted to get a more homogenized sound and a homogenized look, so hence we had Fabian pulled Dion out of the Belmonts, and Frankie Avalon, Bobby Darin. And so it did change. And then it had a resurgence in 1961. But it was short-lived, because by 1964, the Beatles hit the shores, and it was over. It was the change in the time. It was unfortunate for many of us who found nowhere to go, didn't have an audience anymore, didn't have record companies who were receptive to what we did best. It just changed.
I don't think it's nostalgia at all. For me, doo-wop music begins and ends with the music. They're wonderful songs created by some wonderful artists that will last as long as popular music lasts.
It always comes back in commercials, or you see it in programs on public television, or someone is always reconstituting some group whose members have long since passed away with 5 imposters. It seems to last, it seems to have a longevity all its own.
if young people today listen to this music, I think it's appealing to them. The music I play on a Sunday night is about love. I mean, we've all been in love at least once, I hope. And it's something very personal.
I mean, you hear it in the music of the Beatles, you hear it in Boys to Men, and in Backstreet Boys, you hear that harmony.
The music was very simple, very basic, a departure from a more formalized form of pop music. You didn't have to spend 15 minutes to understand what a lyric was saying, but it got right to your heart very quickly.
You hear each of the other three members in your quartet, and you huddle together. You huddle together, and you get that sound that, if you're singing quietly, it sounds as if you're coming from inside a bottle. There's something deeply satisfying to the heart and soul and the ear.
And for some reason, it's a music that never seems to die.
And that was it. And I've never gotten over it.
Our stuff is always going to live along because there's always going to be somebody who just wants to hum something, a phrase or a refrain that makes him feel good.
I wonder who wrote the book of love? Tell me, who wrote the book of love? I've got to know the answer. Was it someone from above? I wonder who wrote the book of love? The book of love. Chapter 1 says the lover, you love her with all your heart. Chapter 2, you tell her, you never ever gonna part. In chapter 3, remember the meaning of romance. In chapter 4, you break up, but you give her just one more chance. Oh, I wonder who wrote the book of love? Who
book of love. Chapter 1 says to lover, you love her with all your heart. Chapter 2, you tell her, you never, 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 ever gonna part. In chapter 3, remember the meaning of romance. In chapter 4, you break up, but you get